this more powerful voice of change that needs to be tapped in. And then it brings back to the role of civil society in the environmental movement. Can we as the Muslims of South Africa really have a good say? And the fact is we can. We have this opportunity, even though many of us are consumers at the ground level, to raise our voices and to make it be heard that it's needed. And the very first thing that needs to come out, and this reflects from an Islamic point of view, is redefining our value, redefining what we define as growth. I mean, this whole NDP you hear, we need to increase our GDP by this, we need to increase our growth, we need to make more money. And Islam brings perspectives on what we value as a society. And from my seeing this, as Muslims, we need to bring this to the forefront, what we value environmentally, what we value in our spiritual selves, and put this as a real value to when we define as we are improving as a country. The second perspective that comes in is nobody's going to come and tell you that you need to plant your own vegetables in your garden because this is going to make you more resilient to something that happens in the external market. And as Muslims, we need to champion this for our own good. And furthermore, like I always like to say, is that the frogs on the wetlands aren't going to hold service delivery protests. So you as the local community next to this wetland needs to actually be the voice for this frogs in the wetlands. Another perspective that also comes in is the independence of civil society in the environmental movement. The environmental movement, as we can even see here, is always sidelined, always put in the second place. But as Muslims, we need to realize that we are connected to our environment, we are reliant on these ecosystem services, and we really need to emphasize this. As running Green Dean and looking at all the local projects that's coming, I mean, the NDP calls a lot for these large-scale movements. But what it also emphasizes is this local, tailor-made solutions that we need to push forward. And when we look around us at all the organizations that come up, from Greenpeace to all these smaller environmental organizations, it's civil society that's leading the environmental movement. And this awareness needs to be made in our Muslim community. And from my perspective, and now it's running Green Dean for 2 years now, and getting in touch with social media, getting in touch with madrasas, with schools, with the average little auntie who feels that we can save the world, and also getting tweets to prevent trees from being cut down. I realize that society needs a lot of role models. They need personalities, they need branding, and they need inspiration. We have a lot of people that sit back and critique and hide behind their organizations, but we really need to be inspired as a Muslim civil society that we can make a difference and that we own this movement. And that the difference we make in while we come in from this Islamic perspective is basically for everybody. Another thing that I have realized with the environmental movement is the lack of information and accessible information. Where do I go to find this? What is right? What is wrong? And from Green Dean's perspective, this is what needs to be provided, tools and skills to our communities. And I mean, everyone sitting here is in a privileged position. You are not an ordinary Muslim citizen that sits here. You're rather a citizen that has the ability to empower others. That's why you've chosen to come to this conference. And we really need this Islamically sound background to motivate people, because people want that Islamic. We are cultural, we spiritual, we need that Islamic matter to go through, and we also need, from a scientific perspective, reliable science. I mean, everybody wants to hold a listed role, but they don't know how to carry this forward, how to make this a reality, how to be sustainable in their movements. And further than that, for those few champions out there who want to do, there's a larger sector of our Muslim population that don't realize how dependent we are as Muslims and as human beings on our environment. So there needs to be this whole awareness movement that goes through it. And yes, reading the NDP, and I would like to end on this, there was a very nice quote, and it actually says that, it's on page 11 of your executive summary, that we as South Africans acknowledge that each and every one of us is intimately and inextricably of this earth, and its beauty and life-giving sources. Furthermore, our lives on earth are both enriched and complicated by what we have contributed to it. And this actually reflected to me to one of our Quranic verses, where in chapter 30, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that the corruption, the facade that has occurred in land and sea, not only in society, but rather in land and sea, is actually by the hands of what we have done. And I found it really quite inspiring to find that there's a quote in the NDP that links right back to a quote from our Holy Quran. All right, shukran.
Thanks so much, Fatima. As someone who sits outside of religion, not only Islam, I have many questions that I'm going to pose to you a little later. But it was fascinating to hear your perspective. Yusuf Raja, from a perspective of someone in private industry, sir?
Yeah. Assalamu alaikum. I've got the difficult task of bringing a business perspective to the discussion on environmental and sustainability in light of the NDP. My two colleagues on my right have spoken about conservation and preservation, which the NDP does talk about. So I'm not going to talk about that because that's already been spoken to. So I'm going to talk about the other aspect of the NDP, which is moving towards a low carbon economy. As a whole, from a business perspective, looking at the NDP, on the first hand, it's a plan which is always good. So business like certainty, they like to have some level of direction in terms of what government is thinking, and from an environmental perspective, you get that in the NDP. Yes, some of the targets may be ambitious, but you have to aim for something. Another key aspect of the NDP is that it is in line with some of the global trends. So, for example, and my friend from Greenpeace has already mentioned it, urbanization is a reality. In 2008, there was a tipping point of more people living in cities than in rural areas. For South Africa, I think it's by 2030 there will be 70% urbanization. So whatever the population is in 2030, there will be 70% of that population in cities. So you can imagine the pressure and stress that's going to be put on cities to accommodate that many people, provide for them, and the resources that needs to go in for them, and the impact on the environment. There's a rise in use of technology in understanding and addressing urbanization, environmental and social challenges. There are now more things connected to the internet than people, and this is important if we're committed towards moving to a low carbon economy. I'll explore that a bit more later. Another key trend is there's an expectation that as a society or standard of living increases, that the environmental conditions around that society would also improve. On a very simplistic level, that's pretty easy to understand. Finally, and most importantly, is the NDP transcends politics. I think that's critical to understand. If you take an example of China, they've got a similar plan in place, and it's a long-term vision that's updated on a regular basis. But it doesn't matter who's the leading party in power, the plan is what they're working towards. You get a sense that this is what the NDP is trying to achieve, which is excellent. I think this was alluded to last night by the Deputy President as well. So when I use the term business, I'm talking about business as in business as we understand it, manufacturers, Muslim businesses like that, but also I'm looking at it in terms of built environment professionals. So people that are working in consultancies, architects, engineers, quantity surveyors, town planners, and all of these people can influence. So that's the other arm of this whole triangle of government, civil society, and business. And as Muslim businesses, we can bring a lot to the party, irrespective of our number in terms of what percentage of the population we make. I think if you look at the economic power that the Muslim community has, it's far greater than the number that we represent in the society. So in terms of moving the country towards a low carbon economy, and by implication, if we are committed to moving towards a low carbon economy, we would then see the benefits in terms of the environmental performance. There's 4 key areas in moving towards a low carbon economy. First is policy. NDP, first step in that direction, but there are other policies in place by government. Civil society needs to understand these policies. So this could be like the Green Building Society in terms of Green Star and making buildings more efficient, or other policies. So civil society needs to engage with these and try and implement them for their own benefit. Moving towards a low carbon economy in essence means building in efficiencies in whatever you're doing. Building in efficiencies in whatever you're doing almost always translates into an economic benefit and an environmental benefit. So it makes sense to do it like this. The second level is economic instruments, and the NDP talks about carbon taxes and rebates and stuff. Now business responds to these sorts of incentives And an obvious example which I've been involved in is the Renewable Energy Integrated Power Program, where companies bid for PV or wind projects, and these are multi-billion rand projects. There's a social component to that. So whichever society those projects are implemented, the society benefits because they become trustees as part of the company in that project. So they get a direct benefit, financial benefit, skills development, job creation and the like. So there's win-win situations for business and society and the environment. The next one is education, and this is critical. I mean, I was in the education session upstairs, and you can see how important education is. So in order to move towards the low-carbon economy, education is key. So the question is, from an environmental point of view, how can business and civil society contribute towards this? Well, one is encouraging our youth to go into fields that promote sustainability, that encourage people to be responsible citizens. Moving away from just becoming lawyers, doctors, and the like. And I think that's important. And I think that is growing more and more. I mean, it's evident by the people that are around here that there's a passion for the environment. So that's the one way. The other way is businesses have corporate social responsibility programs and investment funds. And as civil society, we should challenge them to channel that funding towards stuff that meets our environmental aims and objectives, and towards moving towards a low-carbon economy. Generally, businesses are not unreceptive to this. The third thing about education is about engaging with business. And when I mean engagement, I don't mean tying yourself to a tree. That's not engagement. I mean meaningful engagement towards a common goal where there can be a win-win situation. In most instances, it can. You can achieve a win-win, but you have to be part of the conversation. You can't be sitting in the stand shouting and expect meaningful change to happen. The last aspect which I'll end off with is the fourth need for a low-carbon economy is technology. And I think we can play a role in technology development by creating centers of excellence, technology hub, innovation centers, encouraging our youth and our children to be going towards these things. The Deputy President mentioned last night about locomotives being manufactured in South Africa. Well, if we want to push a low-carbon economy, then we need to develop a green economy with that. And that could be local manufacture of LEDs or photovoltaic cells or wind turbines for that matter. So I think the message I would like to pass on is that engagement is the key for civil society, but engagement on the right platform and in the right way and in the right fashion and in the right manner, going towards a common goal of towards a win-win situation. And as a parting shot, even environmental legislation puts people first, and that's critical for us to understand. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Yusuf. Queen, I warn you that in the absence of a government representative, you might land up having to answer some government questions, having once been an economist at the Treasury. But Queen, your 5 minutes.
Okay. I don't know about being a government representative because I actually audit government. But yeah, that's something I'll look into. My background is in economics, which is really a contradiction to the environmental auditing that I'm doing. In performance auditing, where we actually look at 3 E's, so we look at the way in which programs are implemented, we look at whether the resources were used economically, whether the processes that were engaged were efficient, and also then to find out whether there was effectiveness in the form of achieving the objectives that the programs were intended to achieve. So I understand as an economist that we need to develop the economy, and some of that includes infrastructure development, which then impacts on the environment, because if you're going to be going into mining, building roads, building houses, that has an impact on the environment and can be negative. But then we need to still go for economic growth in order to be able to achieve, some of the things that we want to achieve in terms of education, health, but we need to do so sustainably. We should take on methods that will not impact the environment so negatively. And if it does, we need to then be reactive and create policies that will ensure that there will be rehabilitation and that we can get back the environment to where it should be. I will look at some of the policy issues in terms of what government envisaged to do in terms of the National Development Plan, but also then to say what are the challenges that stand in front of that and what I think needs to happen in terms of strategic thinking and decisions that need to happen to be able to kind of eradicate or really remedy those situations. In terms of National Development Plan, the vision for 2030 is that South Africa's transition to an environmentally sustainable, climate change resilient and low carbon economy and a just society needs to be underway by 2030. You know, they envisage that this transition will happen from 2014 up to 2030, and it will be in 3 phases. At first, they will look at the planning, they will look at policy and also investing. They would look at unblocking the regulatory constraints that are currently there, issues of data collection, issues of baseline information that needs to be put in place, and also then test some of the new concepts and ideas that are coming through to see whether they're feasible and whether we should take them forward and implement them a little bit further. In the second phase, they want then to look at implementing some of those things and also developing sustainable development programs and targeting peaking of greenhouse gas emissions to make sure that they will start then to decline. In the final steps in the transition, they want to look at the realization of the vision of actually reaching the plateau in terms of the greenhouse gases and our emissions, and then, starting with the decline by 2030. It's a start. It's a process, really. But some of the issues or constraints that stand in front of that, this is not an exhaustive list, but it's some of the things that we really need to look into and start to engage on them and kind of put measures in place to ensure that we can counter the effects thereof. The issues of information management in terms of the environmental environment. You know, there is not much information management systems that are available to the data collection that is there. If you want to do any research, want to make any policy decisions, it is difficult for you to base them on, you know, live data, live information that is available that you can then implement some of those decisions or, you know, come up with strong strategic decisions that you can then implement and they will make a greater impact. There's also then capacity constraints in terms of resources, human resources, the kind of people that we have, they might not have those skills or there might not even be sufficient people in those areas that will ensure that we comply. We ensure compliance in terms of monitoring and also enforcing some of those legislation and compliance issues that government should make sure that are enforced and also ensure that people are implementing. So there is a need actually to address through increased research, I think, and also then maintenance of policy relevant information and statistics that will ensure that strategic decision making can take place. And so also increasing capacity in terms of ensuring that we have more younger people wanting to get into that space, educating them and making sure that, you know, there is that element of, yes, we want to develop our economy, but also we want to make sure that we do so sustainably. And then one of the other areas then where the issues is on the land degradation, where we find that there is competing land use in terms of the exploitation, overexploitation of our land, our natural resources, and also then they lead to the degradation thereof. So there's also unsustainable production methods that are used which results in the land and ecosystem degradation, the soil erosion, which then continue to undermine the productive potential of our land. So we know we want to increase food production, you know, food security and all those issues. But then in doing so, are we doing that sustainably? Will it still be happening in years to come? Will we still be able to use that land to produce, the food? And what about the other issues in terms of the wildlife that we have, which we use in terms of our tourism, the Big Five that also needs land? Those are some of the issues that are kind of like fighting for space rather, and we need to look at those issues and decide on which are the better strategic decisions that we can take, to make sure that we have a win-win situation. We can make sure that the land is still available. We will still be able to produce food and make sure that there's food security by adopting those production or farming methods that are sustainable. And then there's also then a need to balance, find a balance really between the development of imperatives and then sustainable utilization of the land. We need to ensure that the developments that have serious environmental or social effects are offset by support improvements in the related areas. An example of this is there was this project in Kenya where the mining company that was mining minerals there actually rehabilitated the land afterwards when they completed with the mining activities. They created a sanctuary on that land for the animals that had been displaced when they were mining. So government and business need to be in partnership to ensure that whoever is causing the negative effects on the environment, they can come then to the party and be held accountable and ensure that the place is left in the way that which they found it or in a much better place. In South Africa, we have those issues in terms of the acid mine drainage. Some of those mines that have caused those issues, they are long gone. Now it's government's responsibility to make sure that those mines are rehabilitated, and it's the taxpayers then that bear the burden of ensuring that that happens. And then some of our issues as well is on the waste issues. This is a very big one where, we don't understand, the quantities of our waste is actually increasing, and there is poor waste management. There is lack of access to waste services, which then lead to pollution and the associated health impacts that come from that. There is a limited understanding of some of our waste flows where people do not understand, the generation of waste and how that goes through the system. The policy and regulatory environment in that space does not actively promote waste management hierarchy. There is an absence of recycling infrastructure. There's growing pressure on the outdated waste management infrastructure, and the cost of waste management are not fully appreciated by the consumers and also by industry. There are too few adequate compliant landfill sites and hazardous wasteful management facilities that are available within the country. I think in that respect, a strategy needs to be developed that focuses on waste reduction, the reuse and recycling, that needs to be implemented. It should be coupled with the producer responsibility. So if you produce the waste, you need to ensure that it then gets disposed of in the correct manner, be it hospital with the medical waste, or be it industry, or be it households. And also then providing consumer education, because currently I don't think people realize really the impact thereof of even the household waste. We're not educated in terms of the recycling. It's not something that is motivated or pushed forward by government to say, instead of just throwing away whatever rubbish or waste that you create in your household, these are the reasons we need to be recycling or reusing. This is the impact that it has on your society in the long term, and we can really start to reduce some of those effects by actually promoting that. And then in terms of the air pollution, then we all know that our country is heavily reliant on coal for energy production. And so this results in air pollution, and the pollutants often then lead to respiratory illnesses. As our panelist has also said about Witbank, I lived in Witbank. And I know that growing up, most of the people or friends that I had asthma problems, respiratory problems, my own parents, even myself. You can realize that, okay, coming from there, moving to another city, the air quality is different. And so those are some of the issues that we have. And so it's understandable that coal is a cheap source of energy. It's abundant. We'll have it for the next 200 years to be able to create energy with it. But then we need to realize that the impact going forward, if we keep in that direction, then it will eventually lead to higher costs for government in terms of health that they will have to pay for the citizens, because then, it has those implications, and mostly on the poor who cannot then afford to provide their own health care.
Okay, Queen, I'm going to stop you there so that we can go forward with a group discussion. And thanks very much to all my panelists for their input. By the theological nature of this conference, I'm quite keen to keep it more or less on that track. And so my first question is to Fatima, and while I ask these questions, I'd like those in the audience to indicate if they have questions so that we can start getting the microphone to you, but so that we can just keep the conversation going. So if you have a question, please indicate. And sure, we've got a whole stack. Well, that's fantastic. All right, okay. So my first question is going to go to Fatima. You made a very interesting point, almost by the by, that you felt that environmentalism was a female issue in Islam. And so my question is twofold. Firstly, I perceive Islam as being quite a patriarchal culture. And so by that, are you saying that it is a second-rate issue in Islam? But also, why would that be so, that you say that it is a female issue?
I think I just need to clarify what I actually meant by that. I think generally in the environmental sector we see a large number of female students actually taking part, that females are the champions of the environment when we look at university. Inherently, when it comes down to Muslims being a smaller percentage of the population, you'll end up with very few Muslim males actually taking up. I mean, there's a few that do actually go through. But recently you just see many more females taking up the role. So I think that clarifies that. And when I meant by patriarchal system, I think being an organization that was started by women to actually tap into this patriarchal system was a bit more difficult. Personally, I've never ever been rebuffed by any of them, and I need to actually thank all the religious leaders that I've actually spoken to. No one has ever told me back off. But I could feel a difference that if I was a Muslim boy going out there or a Muslim male, it would have been much more easier to launch this organization and to even tap into the system.
Yusuf, you mentioned Sorry, okay, Karen.
I might be shooting myself, but as a student of sociology and anthropology, I kind of disagree with you in the term that Islam is patriarchal. I mean, the gender principle in Islam, and correct me if I'm wrong, is equal but different. Because what people fail to understand, if you look 1,000 years, 1,400 years at the beginning of Islam, that was when women in Europe could not even step out of their homes without being kidnapped and raped and, done whatever people feel like. That was the time the principle of access to property, rights of women were introduced. And that was revolutionary. I think from my pedantic view is that what has happened is that the interpretation and application has failed to catch up. Because if we had continued without revolutionary role that as at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, that they made this must have sounded crazy to a lot of people. How dare you give women power and say that if you divorce you have this access and so on. And we know one of the Prophet's wife was one of the best jurisprudents in Islam. I can't remember the name. Aisha. I mean, and that was old when women couldn't put out. So we need to understand that gender difference is equal but different. And I don't think it's, maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think from my point of view, strictly patriarchal.
My job, of course, is to create discussion. Here we go.
Thanks, Simon, and thanks to the panelists. The name is Rehana Musaji from Rehana Musaji Consulting. I think this particular panel really points to part of the problem in government and even in the NDP is that we tend to compartmentalize society and people's lives according to directorates. And if I just think about all the sessions that have happened today and how environment in fact should have been central to the discussion on creating safer communities, to the discussion on health, to the discussion on job creation and fighting unemployment, that we really can't think of environment as this nice little thing for green people to do. And I think if there's one thing that this ASRI conference can do, and if there's practical demonstration that can happen from civil society responses, it's really on issues environmental. Everything from, separation at source, which, can be advocated in the community and started quite easily. But also I think our transport habits say a lot about how, in fact, we perceive environment. And this idea of one person, one car culture is unsustainable. The kind of space we are giving to cars in society as opposed to people really suggests that the basic right to walk is something that we're not providing infrastructure for.
I'm going to steal that phrase of the basic right to walk from you. Thank you so much. I absolutely love that. Sir.
Mr. Chair, thank you very much for allowing me. My name is Rafiq Bayat. I'm from SAWASA, South African Water and Sanitation Academy. Me and my colleague here, Dr. Goni, has been instrumental to bring the World Toilet Summit to South Africa. It was another talk shop, but something happened. Too much thunder, no rain. But we will be the first college, NPO, NGO, talking about taboo. Even here, I see nobody wants to talk about, sorry, I'm going to put it in classical English, about shit. Okay? And so, why don't we talk about this great challenge? When you go into the informal settlements, they are taking human excreta. They still bucket system, and because they don't remove them, they're dumping it into Jixkay. They're dumping it down. So I think we need to bring the issue of human excreta that is polluting on the global agenda. And as far as AMD, my colleague, he passed away last year. We have a 80-page research. The East Solutions, to acid mine drainage, and I would like to make it available to anybody who wants this report. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comment. I actually have had this debate with Anthony Turton amongst other water scientists, and one of the great challenges in South Africa is to, in his words, revise the idea that a sewage engineer is a glamorous position. But I do agree, and certainly we are getting to the stage where we're beginning to see sewage as a source of things like phosphates and valuable metals like gold and silver, and unfortunately uranium in some parts of the community. So I completely agree with you. And if you have any ideas about glamorizing the professional path, so that we can start getting our sewage plants going. Just from my panel's point of view, please indicate if you have any comments. Otherwise, I'm just going to carry on and take questions. Fatima.
To reply to your comment about how we as society are not aware, and I think this is something that's very important, is that we're culturally so disconnected from where we come from or what we depended on that we really don't think about where our shit goes when we flush the toilet. And I think, especially speaking from looking at a lot of urban students, I mean, we go to university, we've grown up in these nice suburban houses, and the large part of our Muslim population is privileged. And yeah, we just don't engage with that. And it also brings to mind a hadith where the Prophet actually forbade excreting yourself under a tree and in waterways. And I mean, if we just extend these basic theological points, that our religious leaders actually speak about, but just expand it to our basic lifestyles will actually make a lot of people feel very guilty.
I just wanted to agree with the statement that, our people are not educated in terms of the impacts, therefore, of environmental degradation to their lives. In terms of the waste management as well, ensuring that, you reuse, you make sure that you segregate the waste at source. Walking, that one is one of those issues where, you have to think in South Africa about the crime rates and all of those issues. But then also things like water, the way in which we use water. We are a water scarce country, but the way in which we use our water resources is like it's abundant. We are one of those countries where we use clean, drinkable water to flush our toilets. And there's nobody who's looking at that. And people are not even aware, it's our right. I will use however much water I want. The impact, there is no education from government side to ensure that people realize that we're not saying that don't use water because it costs a lot or whatever, because in the near future you will not have that. So if we have that awareness as people, I think things will start to change with that education.
It reminds me of an internet meme where a third world child looks into the camera and says, "So let me get this straight, you guys are so rich that you get to crap in your drinking water?" Fine.
Yeah, I think that sums it up. Thanks for that question. I think the issue is not so much, there's a lot of awareness, especially at the community level, that needs to happen. And I will be one of the first to say we as civil society are not doing enough. We should be out there on the ground, not sitting comfortable in our air-conditioned offices in the capitals and, claiming to represent the grassroots. And I was part of a Rustlers Valley from the Free State Declaration that talks about building from below and across borders, that we should get out of our offices and be out there in the community more. But you also need to consider the policy environment. Now, that's where the challenge, a big challenge is. You're talking about an 8-page document. It is not for want of information at the policy level. They know. For example, on energy, 3.5 or 5 years ago, Greenpeace with Stellenbosch University, with WITS and the university from Norway, did a detailed research on different energy scenarios. If you follow coal pathway, if you follow nuclear, if you follow renewable, a mix of wind, solar, biodiesel, and so on, what would it amount to? If you put 1 trillion rand or 1 million rand into coal power, what does it get you, including the total cost, health, water impact, and so on? And we did that modeling and came to the conclusion that renewable energy would be the ideal. And everybody agrees with that. Nobody disputes it. It's the lack of political will to do the right thing, because there are so many vested interests in the energy and other sectors in this economy. So then that makes it even more critical that we catalyze an active citizenry who would say no longer in my name, because all the mess we are seeing in ESCOM, we are going to pay for that. And if ESCOM is making uninformed or unclever decisions today, they want to build 6 new nuclear reactors, forgetting to tell the South African public that if you start a nuclear reactor today, all things being equal, the first watt of energy will only come out in 10 to 15 years. That's how long it takes. And we have an urgent imperative in the meantime to have immediate energy, which renewable can do overnight, like we've seen. So, but majority of South Africans tend to keep quiet about it. So maybe all of us need to go through our Ummah, our community, and catalyze that mass movement that will become more politically informed, not just during elections or toying and burning their only community hospital, but focusing on the wider national development issue. Lastly, we are of the contention as Greenpeace that this country needs a development czar. I don't know how else to explain it. A development czar who is like the gatekeeper of all development. I mean, it sounds a bit communist, but many countries like Rwanda are doing it, or China, where if you want to give, like we have 40 mining licenses a year, most of them with no water license or water clearance as required by the Constitution, and therefore destroying the water, the scarce water resources. You should say no. So if you have a development that I say each development, these new 2,000 kilometers of road, where does it fit in the broader national development plan? That's what they do in Rwanda. And in a short time, that small country with no resources has really made tremendous progress.
Okay, Mike, I'm going to stop you there. Thank you very much for your comment. Right, we are going to go, one of you at the front, you two at the back, and then across to the lady in the blue, and then we'll take you. Okay.
Thank you. I'd like to begin just with a comment before my questions. The one thing is the importance of a plan. Before I start, my teacher is in the audience, so he can correct me if I'm saying anything wrong, Maulana Ashraf.
It's always more fun when you just contradict your teacher. Yeah.
The first thing about a plan, if you look at the Bible and the Quran, there's always been a plan. When we look at the Prophet Joseph, he was divinely instructed about the plan of harvesting and conserving for 7 years and 7 years. The second one was the Prophet Noah. His plan was to build the ark and then to get the male and female of every animal onto the ark. When we come 1400 years ago, I think we've got a great example from our Prophet. In my opinion, I think he was the one person who had the lowest carbon footprint ever to walk on the face of the earth. He advocated against wastage and extravagance. A simple thing is, we know that he's possibly even made ablution or wudu with less than half a liter of water. And he's even probably said something to this effect that if you live on a property with a river flowing through, you still have to make effort to conserve water. So my question is to Fatima, in the context of what we see around us, especially when it comes to the Muslim countries, we're energy rich, but we're known to be the most extravagant and wasteful. Now I want to know from you is, how difficult would you find, or what initiatives can you start to change that culture from where we come from, where we're supposed to be a people of living simple lives and conserving, but unfortunately we live in a life of waste and extravagance.
Okay, I think we've got the questions. So I'm gonna try and keep us.
Simon, if you give me one last question for you, directed at you, if you could just give some comments, something about climate change and how scary is the future about food security? How worried should we be?
Okay, fantastic. It's nice to have a question to be as well. Okay, Fatima, if you'll take that, then we'll go to Sir in the back, lady in the blue, and the Sir in the front, and then we'll catch you guys.
I think looking a lot at our Middle Eastern Arabian countries is actually quite a nightmare for many environmentalists. But I think what happens in those countries is that, number one, many issues have been sidelined, and obviously social issues should come to the forefront. Of encouragement is actually what's happening in Jordan, where the Queen of Jordan, that woman, has actually started a whole environmental movement. And from what I hear, there was actually a few rangers that she actually sent down to study with the South African field rangers, and they've started this whole movement of greed in Jordan, which is actually quite good. Recently been to Mecca and Medina, it's actually quite horrific at the amount of waste and that goes in. But you see that there is a lot of structures and encouragement in that, and especially, Jummah khutbah has been given on environmental matters. So I wouldn't say it's a place that we need to go for encouragement, but I also think there's a growing realization within themselves about the environmental movement.
Assalamu alaikum, Nadeem Mohammed from the MSA. My question is directed at Ms. Lamini. She mentioned that we are still using coal because it's cheaper, but we're going to regret it 200 years down the line. So how do we get society to buy into the idea of renewable energy where it is more expensive and we're facing poverty? So how do we encourage spending more money on something that will help us before it's too late?
I think actually it's the conflict between the different policy issues that we have in terms of we want to grow our economy, we want to provide better health care, we want to get more kids through school, and if we use more expensive sources of energy, that will make us less competitive in terms of most of the industries. They use a lot of this energy source to make sure that we're still competitive in the world. But then I think it goes back to the issue of not educating society to know that, yes, we are providing you with these, basics that you require to ensure, that we have equitable and sustainable lives as well. But then these are the impacts that we have. I think then we have to have the choice as people to ensure that, okay, is this something that we want to live with? Live for now, ensure that we're getting these short-term gains, and in the long run we'll have these issues. Or do we want to start implementing some of these issues? And also government then incentivizing, people to start using different sources of energy, and also the alternative energy sources that might be expensive, but if they subsidize, and also incentivizing a business to ensure that they use those kind of other alternative sources, it can start to improve that. It's not something that's going to happen overnight, because stations that are going to use coal going into the future, but then we need to start having those conversations, and we need to start